This is the video you've all been asking for. Welcome to my MacBook Pro 16-inch versus iPad Pro 2018 full comparison. In this video, I'm going to be going over pretty much every difference between these two devices in regard to their form factor and usage case and components, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll know which one is right for you. But before we continue here, I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a like on this video, comment if you have any questions, suggestions, or opinions, as the algorithm likes that, and will help push my videos to more people. So beginning with form factor and design, from the initial look here, it appears we're comparing apples and oranges, but really these devices are more comparable than you'd think, although one is a tablet and one is a laptop. You get advantages with both. And despite their differences, which we'll talk about, both are crafted very, very nicely with aluminum and glass and nice plastic, you know what I mean? Like not cheap plastic at all. The keyboard on here with the MacBook feels really nice, and the Apple Pencil and the antenna lines with the iPad Pro feel very high quality as well. And speaking of a keyboard, to kind of state the obvious, one is built into the MacBook Pro, and it's really nice this year. Apple redesigned the whole keyboard setup with this new MacBook Pro, no more butterfly switches, and it just feels really nice and offers a really awesome typing experience. Whereas with the iPad Pro, you have to buy your own keyboard case or a third-party keyboard case if you want, and more often than not, it's going to attach via the smart connector, which is found on the back, which offers power and connection. And on top of the keyboard here, you get the touch bar with the MacBook Pro, which not only offers function buttons, but you also get custom function buttons with particular apps like Photoshop here. And while the MacBook Pro has a gigantic trackpad and has a cursor within macOS, which offers a fine point of input, you get a superior one, I think, in a lot of ways with the iPad Pro, with the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, which is really convenient. It attaches right to the side here and charges, and offers a really awesome writing and drawing experience with pressure sensitivity, and it just feels really smooth to, glide across the screen. To touch on speaker quality, both these devices are known for having really awesome sound output. You have 4 individual drivers on the iPad Pro, which offers a really nice stereo media consumption experience. But with the MacBook Pro, Apple did some magic this year. The stereo setup in here is unbelievably good, which is good for professional settings and media consumption. It's just so much louder and richer and just has a lot more depth than the iPad, and I'll show you that here with this quick test. Next up, let's talk I/O. With the MacBook Pro, you get 4 individual USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 ports, which offers a lot of connectivity, especially if you're connecting displays and drives and other peripherals, whereas with the iPad Pro, it's more of a mobile device. You get 1 USB Type-C port. But regardless, you're going to have to use USB adapters or dongles to make things work. And before I forget to mention, you do get a headphone jack with the MacBook Pro, which is really great if you're somebody who prefers wired headphones for your work. No headphone jack on the iPad Pro, however. And last up, let's talk biometrics here. You get Face ID with the iPad Pro, and I'll demo it here. It's most of the time really, really quick to register your face, although it's a bit finicky at times. And then you have Touch ID with the MacBook Pro here, and for the most part, it's pretty much flawless every time you use it. Next up, let's talk displays here, and you get 2 sizes with the iPad Pro, 11 inches and 12.9 inches, whereas with this bigger MacBook Pro, you get 16 inches, at least with the specifications and the components within this device. You cannot get like an i9 with the 13-inch model, unfortunately, right now. And despite the apparent size differences, both these displays are backlit LED, both have similar pixel density, and both feature True Tone. But to list the differences, the MacBook Pro's display is more color accurate and just has a wider color range, whereas the iPad's display is brighter by 100 nits. This goes up to 500, this goes up to 600 nits. But most importantly, the iPad Pro's display features 120 Hz or ProMotion as Apple calls it, which makes navigating through iPadOS really, really smooth, unlike the 60 Hz experience that you get with the MacBook Pro here, which is not bad by any means, but still not as smooth as what you're getting with the iPad Pro. And to quickly compare the size differences here, obviously it's kind of hard to compare because of the differences in the operating systems. One is a more mobile operating system, although it's capable, whereas the other one is a full-fledged desktop operating system. I would say the iPad Pro is great for mobile work, especially in the 11-inch form factor, although you can get it in the 12.9-inch form factor, which I would say is better for writing and drawing in general, because you do have more screen real estate, whereas with the MacBook Pro, it's really fit for macOS, which allows you to drag windows around and allows you to, I would say, multitask even better. better. And the big display is also awesome for professional or creative apps like Final Cut and Photoshop, which do require or benefit from a lot more screen real estate here, 3 inches more than the biggest iPad Pro. Next up, let's talk battery here. And Apple put a humongous battery into the MacBook Pro 16-inch this year. It's 99.8 watt hours, which is just under the legal limit that you can bring onto an airplane. So the battery life with this is just phenomenal for everyday tasks. Apple rates it at 11 hours for like video playback and just, you know, typical document or word processing. Whereas with the iPad, you get 10 hours-ish, at least with the 11-inch iPad Pro. But long story short, with everyday tasks, you should be able to get through the day just fine with both these devices for emailing and document typing and, you know, video playback, like I said, media consumption. But when it comes to intensive tasks, the fact of the matter is ARM-based processors are just more power efficient. So if you're video editing with the iPad Pro, although the battery will drain quicker, it's not going to drain as quickly as it does with the MacBook Pro, which has less power efficient Intel and AMD processors in here. You have a dedicated GPU, more RAM, and a more power hungry processor. So I would say if you're somebody who needs to do intensive tasks purely on the go and you don't have access to, you know, like a wall outlet, then the iPad Pro might suit you better here. Whereas with the MacBook Pro, if you need actual desktop components to run desktop apps like Final Cut and Premiere, which I'll talk about, then obviously the MacBook Pro will be worth the compromise of having to plug in for, you know, intensive tasks and gaming once again, because you are really putting stress on the CPU and GPU, which are more power hungry than the components in its iPad counterpart. To quickly touch on camera here, obviously the MacBook Pro has a webcam, which is good for FaceTime or Skype, and that's about it. Whereas with the iPad Pro, you have a 12 megapixel sensor and a rear flash, and this camera is actually good for 4K 30 video. The camera setup on here is pretty impressive. It does take some decent images and video, although I wouldn't recommend using it like a smartphone. It's kind of weird, but if you're so inclined to do so, then I won't judge. And you also get a 7 megapixel front-facing camera with all the Face ID tech like I mentioned in there as well. So this is better for FaceTime and selfies and whatnot, but honestly, I wouldn't say you should be taking anything other than, you know, pictures of documents and papers and stuff for your work with this device. You know, the camera in here is more oriented towards work. And last but certainly not least, let's talk performance with both these devices. And this is where things get interesting. The iPad Pro continues to impress me with its A12X processor, even though it's over a year old. Both of the single-core scores in Geekbench 5 with these devices are similar. They're in the lower 1000s. And then obviously the i7 does perform a bit better, and the i9 even better. This edging out the iPad Pro by 1,000 points in multi-core scores here. And even with this set, and even though these scores were to be expected, the iPad Pro really does show how much value you're getting with it at its price point. This starts out at $800 new and even less than used, and of course this starts out at $2,400. So the fact that you get similar multi-core scores and just 1,000 points under that of this device, again, is just damn impressive. And the iPad Pro really is a great bang for your buck. But while these devices are both powerful comparatively and individually, they're not for every creative or professional for that matter. If you need or prefer desktop apps like the Adobe Suite and Final Cut Pro and AutoCAD programs and just stuff that you have to run on either macOS or Windows, then obviously your choice is a no-brainer. You're going to have to go with a laptop for right now. And I'll also remind you of the component advantages here. You get up to 64 gigabytes of RAM with the MacBook Pro 16-inch. I have 16 gigs in this configuration here. You also get up to 8 terabytes of SSD storage, although I have 512 gigabytes in here, so more base storage for storing video and just other files in general. And you also get a dedicated GPU. In this device particularly, it's the 5300M with 4 gigabytes of GDDR6, I believe. You can bump it up to the 5500M with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. And this component is great for accelerating programs like Final Cut and AutoCAD and just other stuff that can take advantage of a secondary processor, and also makes gaming, like actual PC gaming, possible with this device. I actually did a gaming test with this MacBook Pro, and it was really impressive, and I do recommend watching that. I'll leave a link in the video description if you're interested. Whereas if you're very mobile, or you're an artist or an illustrator and you would really benefit from the fine point of input offered by the Apple Pencil, then the iPad Pro, I would say, is more of the device for you. Obviously go to the store and figure out which size you want, the 11 or the 12.9, depending on how mobile you want to be or how big of a canvas that you want. And maybe you like iPadOS. It's a very capable mobile operating system, and it's becoming more and more comparable to macOS by the day. It also has a really awesome file management system now. So yeah, it's getting more and more computer-like, and the app selection is very well established. You have Affinity Photo, you have LumaFusion, and you also have some good note-taking apps, which will allow you to get actual work done. Like my favorite app for iPad Pro currently is GoodNotes, and I use it as a sort of planner to plan out my day. I also have used GoodNotes to take in-class notes, detailed ones at that, and again, the experience is very smooth and streamlined and pleasant with the Apple Pencil. And ultimately, both are good at everyday tasks, you know, like word processing and email, like I've mentioned. However, if that is your main usage, even if you're like a business person, I'd recommend getting the iPad Pro, or if you need macOS, then opt for the MacBook Air or a baseline MacBook Pro 13-inch. Whereas if you need a desktop operating system to do, you know, really professional-oriented tasks, like if you need Final Cut Pro, once again, if you need Premiere, if you need Photoshop, full-fledged Photoshop, by the way, not the bullshit that Apple and Adobe put together for the iPad. If you need actual desktop apps, because as of right now, the industry leans more in the favor of macOS and just desktops or laptops in general, then this is going to be the device for you. And I would say it's going to be worth it with the power and the components that you get here. This is a really awesome device, and Apple did an excellent job with it this year. I really have been loving my time with this, and if I plan to keep it, I will definitely get a higher spec version for my own workflow. And of course, I also adore my iPad Pro in ways better than this. This is more of a boring device. This device offers 120 Hertz. The Apple Pencil is a joy to use once again, and I love using it for school-oriented tasks when I don't need to use my MacBook or a laptop in general. And that about wraps things up here. Once again, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like on this video, comment if you have any questions, suggestions, or opinions, and of course, subscribe for more content like this. I have my full review of the MacBook Pro 16-inch coming up soon, my full review and more videos on the Surface Laptop 3 coming soon, iPhone content, iPad content, you name it. So stay tuned if you want more from me. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.